everybody. Welcome back to Eggs the Podcast. Today's special guest is Antony Langdon, guitar player and founding member of the band Spacehog. How are you, Antony?
I'm good, my friend. Thank you. Very good to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for coming on and making the time for this. Before we get going, we're talking today in large part because Spacehog, along with EMF, have got a tour coming up. They're going to hit the road on the 14th in San Jose and a bunch of cities after that. We'll talk more about that as we go. In the meantime, Antony, maybe let's just kind of start a little bit at the beginning. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the band really well and have a lot of affinity, actually, for the band. So I'm really excited to be talking to you in general. But let's talk a little bit about just sort of the early days, how the band came together, where you guys met. You've got kind of a fun story there.
Yeah, it's kind of, at this point, it's folklore and legend, you know. But the truth of the matter is, it was a bunch of circumstances. I was living in New York at the time, in the Manhattan. And I was breaking up with a girl that I was going out with at the time, and I was all heartbroken. So I called my brother, and he said, well, look, I'll come over and visit you for a couple of weeks. And he came over, and right before he came, I went to get one day a mate of mine that I lived with, who was his name's Roghaar. He was a mate of mine. I lived with him in New York, and he played guitar. Anyway, I went up to get a coffee one morning up the street, and I never got his place called Michael and Zoe's, which was on 2nd Avenue. And I walk in, and this fella behind the counter speaks with a Yorkshire accent like mine, you know, an Northern English accent. So I was like, wait a minute, where are you from? He said, I'm from Leeds. I said, well, I'm from Leeds. He said, where are you from? He said, Horsforth, which is the little next town along from mine, which is Headingley in Leeds, right? Like a suburb of Leeds, you know.
Sure.
And it was like The Who live at Leeds, by the way, just for reference. So I met him there, and he told me he was in a band in England. I knew his band, and he knew my brother's band. And then a few days later, my brother came over. I said, let's jam then. Let's get together and we'll do a jam. So we did. And we started the band with Bob Carreri, who was my roommate. He played guitar for a while, but he was already busy with work, and he was more of a blues guy. And Johnny said, listen, I've got a mate in Leeds that probably be up for it. Let's get him over. That's Richard Steele. And he took over. And that's really how it got going in New York. And before you know it, we played our first gig at a place called The Trip on the Bowery. And not long after that, the label showed up. We got really lucky. I mean, Manhattan at that time was like a hive of... It was, you know, there was a lot of money available, and they were signing a lot of acts in this was in 94, I want to say, 93, 94. And it was just, there was a lot of money in the business still at that point. And we lucked out, and there kind of was a bidding war, and I was working for a photographer, and a fashion photographer. So I knew all these models, and they all came to our gigs. And that sort of helps, you know. So
it doesn't hurt.
It didn't hurt. It didn't hurt. So that was good. And then we got signed by Seymour Stein, who was a legendary dude who'd signed Madonna and My Bloody Valentine. A lot of bands that we liked, actually, a lot of English bands. And so we got signed to Sire Electra about a year after we started, just under a year actually. It was quite quick. And then it took us about another year before we went up to Woodstock, recorded in Resident Alien, and then released In the Meantime in '95, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that story is a lot of fun because, I don't know, there's something about, like, you know, these young English lads, they come over to America and, like, I mean, you guys sort of got the whole, like, I guess, American dream, right? I mean, full-on American rock star, you know, the whole business. So it's a lot of fun that you guys came into that. And I read something about you. I mean, obviously, In the Meantime was the big hit that rolled out in that era. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about, I read an article, but I thought it was kind of interesting. You guys... I mean, obviously that hit took off, and it maybe was expected or unexpected or whatever. It was obviously a very popular song. You guys were already touring with it and playing at night, or ending your set with it. But in the article I read, it said that if you had the opportunity to have done something different, you might have held on to that and tried to drag out the experience a little bit, and maybe not go sort of right to the moon like that. And and I imagine in the moment going right to the moon felt pretty amazing. But I wonder if you just sort of talk about that through the lens of a mid-20s you back then when the song was hitting, and now an older man or a wiser man.
Well, it's like what's her name said, Kurt Cobain's Mrs. Courtney, when she said, you know, you get what you want and you'll never want it again. There's a lot of it's an incredible experience. It was a really amazing experience to be rocketed into sort of like the spotlight on MTV, and then next thing you knew we were on Letterman and Leno and all those big kind of TV shows back in the day. And then we were on tour, and off we went, and it went from one thing to the next, you know, and that song really blew up, and really we toured that record for like what amounts to about 2 or 3 years. And I think looking back on it, like you were sort of quoting from that article, I think nobody prepares you for what that's like. And I know it's a cliche and it's sort of slightly embarrassing because in a weird way it's a first world problem, and especially, we were lucky enough to get signed and we got some success. But I think that you're not prepared for it. So I think in the sense that, coming to terms with ascension and also building solid foundation, in terms of fan base and not just sort of the one-hit wonder syndrome, is difficult, and I think it's better if it goes slow. It's probably better for, especially young men like that. We were all young lads and we all wanted it. We'd all dreamed about it. And like you say, I don't think we could have done it in England. It was kind of about being in America, and I think it is the American dream, yeah. And I've really benefited from that, and I've really, it's been a real great experience for me coming to America. But
would you say, and I don't know exactly the origins of why you came to New York in the first place, but I mean, would you guys say that, like I've known a lot of Europeans that are more what I would consider on kind of the American spectrum as it pertains to kind of business and coming here to really make it and break, find their way, where maybe they leave Europe and like you just mentioned, maybe you couldn't have done this in England. So it really took kind of the chemistry of being in America to make that happen. As young men coming over from Leeds, like, did you guys have expectations of this kind of thing, or were you just trying to get away from the town you grew up in, or what was that sort of early days like?
In my case, it's a funny story, but I was working for a gentleman in a film business in London called Golden 7 Films. He's an American dude. His name was Robert Golden. And he owned this company, it was called Golden 7 Films, and I worked for them. And one summer, I'd worked for them for a few years, and one summer, I was doing a commercial for Stella Artois beer, and they said, listen, Robert, who's the main man, and I was kind of slightly terrified of him. He was a guy from Detroit, and he was he was a very serious man, but I was slightly scared of him at the time, and I was just like I just got the bottom rung, the runner. Anyway, I got his daughter assigned to me. Her name was Jenny Golden, and she got assigned to me, to help with me because she was going to intern for the summer. Well, we're doing Stella Artois, so my job was to froth the beer up, and then he could spoon the froth on. Because in England, you have to use the product. You can't use special effects, So they're spooning this stuff on this beer, shooting on film back in the day, And Jenny came to work with me, so we would be spooning the foam on, and then we'd take a little sip. So before you knew it, we were hammered, right? And and she invited me to go back to her house with her, after the shoot. So we were both young. I think I was 22 and she was about 19. And we went back to her house. Anyway, I woke up in the morning, only at the end of the bed was her dad standing there, who was my boss, right? So I was like, all right, that's it. He just looked at me and then walked out. And I said to Jenny, your dad was just here. That's it. I'm going to get fired. Well, I didn't get fired, and eventually I went up from second assistant director to first assistant director, and anyway I got promoted basically. And we ended up going out for 4 years, and she moved back to New York, and that's why I went in the first place. Now, with regards to business, I think that we didn't understand fully what America was in terms of the American dream and how it is that we. How America's not afraid for people to develop, grow, entrepreneurially and opportunity. There's so much opportunity here. Whereas in England, there is a bit of like the tall poppy syndrome. They cut you down a bit, and it's it's a stifling factor for England. And also, I've always quite enjoyed in a weird way, I've enjoyed being a foreigner. In a strange way. And in a way, I mean, of course, a lot of people identify in America as being Americans, but there's also, everybody comes from somewhere in America. So there's that feeling on the one hand of being in this melting pot, and on the other hand, being a weirdo, and especially being English at that time in New York, it kind of was a bit of a pass to do. It was, we were still in the good books in those days, and and especially around music, because England's got that whole legacy of music, So and I don't think there were the resources in terms of music getting signed out of England. There just wasn't the money in England that there is in America. Certainly not for music, And at that time, a lot of my mates were getting signed around in the New York area, So. We were right, it was right time, right place. A lot of it was that. And, my brother had already put together a lot of the songs in England. And so he was only 21 when he came over. And so he really did have a whole array of songs ready to go. And all we had to do was learn how to play them and then start jamming it out, And yeah, it was great. We had this bidding war going on, We actually did a deal with Epic at one point for a recording. Then I think we got $25K to do a recording for Columbia. And then finally we made a deal with as I said, Sire Electra. Seymour Stein at the time he still had his Sire imprint, which was his kind of own label that he'd done Madonna with and various other acts. And And we just liked him. He was a real legend within the music game, and he was really great for us. It was a great thing, and we got a good deal, and we got on with it.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned at the top, I mean, this is obviously, I mean, in this era, sort of early to mid 90s, I mean, this is a really hot time for music and big signing deals. And like, as you mentioned, there's a lot of money in the business back then. And so, I mean, all the labels you just mentioned off are obviously huge players in that era. Mm-hmm. And finding a good deal is such a big piece of especially the musicians in that era, right? And especially things around ownership of music and things like that. I mean, were you guys able to negotiate a deal that was really supportive of your band and not one of these, horrible deals that you hear where basically you've given up everything and you own nothing at the end?
Well, in those days, it's much more, cutthroat now in that regard in terms of 360 deals and now it's much, people, I mean, labels want a piece of it all, including merchandise, the whole bit, whether they get it all, but they certainly go for it. In those days, it was much more, divided up. And the good news that we had was we never signed a publishing deal right at the beginning. We just did a record deal. So we got pretty much everything we needed to record. And then we got tour support, and it was really, I don't know, we wound up getting about $500,000, I think, by the time we were done with everything we needed to get going, which is, a chunk of change now, let alone then,
Sure.
This was, 30 years ago. But then later on, I think before we'd released the second album is when we made our first publishing deal, and then we got quite a lot of money. So we had, more than $1 million, I think, for that. Because we'd already, In the Meantime, was out, so they knew that was happening, And we signed with BMG, which was a big publishing German company, I believe, but they have a big branch in the US here, in New York. We were able to get what I would say we were really supported, and Elektra were a great label for us, great start, We sort of floundered a little bit on the second single, it's always that sophomore slump, and we've sort of, in a way, struggled to get from under the kind of, like a lot of bands do, it's like that big hit right at the beginning. When it's that big, it's hard to sort of, top it. And if you're not lucky enough to get one after the other, if you get a few, then it seems like you get a good foothold. But that's been difficult for us, And also because our music, it's quite eclectic in a lot of ways. We toured once with Oasis, and when you listen to them, a lot of we were talking about the other day, but a lot of their songs, not to sort of pigeonhole them, but a lot of them sound the same. There's a vibe and they're all similar. So you know what you're getting, whereas us, we're across genres a lot more, because our influences are quite widespread, and I think that maybe in some senses went against us because I think that you didn't quite know where to put us, And then other bands were coming out, like Linkin Park came out, and other, Limp Bizkit came out at that time, right after we'd come out. And it was this weird gap when Kurt Cobain had just died. And I rang my brother and I said, look, we got a chance, because at that time everything was grunge, it was like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all those bands. We're all brilliant bands, but just not in quite where we were at that time, We were doing all right in New York, but to go into, national and then international, where was our slot, And so I think that was the thing with In the Meantime. It was a brilliant song. It was a great launch. And it was great to experience all that. But if I could rewrite history, I think I might have slowed it all down. Yeah. I mean, you can't, you never know how it's going to go. Certainly I'm grateful, but, and it certainly kept us in, kept us out the gutter. And,
well, this is one of those things, especially like from a business standpoint. I mean, obviously what you've got here is this, I guess really in this case, being that your brother's in the band also, you've got like this family-owned business that's now 30 years old, and you've had to maintain this IP and keep the brand going and, continue to leverage the big hits and things like that. But, we were talking to, spoke with James Atkin from EMF before, and he had sort of a similar situation where they had just an enormous hit that sort of was bigger than they could have ever imagined, right? I mean, and in your guys' case, it's kind of this way too, where you had this massive hit. But one thing that I thought was interesting about you guys in particular as a band is it doesn't seem like, I mean, you could probably do a little reverse calculus or 2020 vision looking backwards that that song was maybe In the Meantime being the right song at the right time, in that it's sort of, I don't know, grunge enough. Does that make sense? Like, it's got some heavy guitars in it, stuff like that.
Sure.
And so it sort of fits the era where you guys are also quite a bit more eclectic. There's kind of a range of music in your sound.
Right.
And which, I think is awesome. But I think there was an opportunity for you to have the song that hit there. But what I think is really cool or really clever about, especially that first album, Resident Alien, is that you didn't, I guess, give up on the creative part, right? You didn't just try to become the mold. You used some of the examples earlier of like Oasis, where, you kind of know what you're getting and everything sounds kind of the same. But for you guys, being diverse, kind of, in your sound is almost, it's a feature, not a bug, right? Like, this was by design, that we're creative people, and this is our sound, and it does oscillate a little up and down. And so I think I think it's a really interesting thing, because I think, especially with a big hit like that, it would have been really easy to just put together a bunch of songs that all kind of sound a little grungy, a little, whatever came after grunge kind of era. But, keep the guitars heavy, keep all that stuff going, and maybe tame yourselves a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that, I mean, the thing is, maybe we should have fused with EMF when I had 2 hits then, couldn't we? In the meantime, and Unbelievable. No, I think it's one of those things that we have a lot of different influences. We were, as young lads, were in a church choir, so we were quite influenced by, that classical music as well. We were both educated in music, a little bit like piano and stuff like that. We did it, in part of the choir deal. So we learn classical music and piano and music theory, So I think as a result, I think it is like that, as you say. My brother definitely is very eclectic. He's all over the place, and I think on the one hand, like I say, that requires that we need a sort of slightly more, dare I say, sophisticated audience in the sense that they enjoy the record. It's a bit more varied. But on the other hand, I do think at times, it'd be great to also just be like, have a bunch of hits that you can just kind of dine out on. It definitely makes it easier to build the show bigger and more money and all the rest. But
sure.
But it is what it is. You can only really do what you are, and I think it came out as it came out, and we continue to do that. We've just been working on a new track now. I'm in Oakland right now, just rehearsing for this tour, and we've just been working on a song that Richard wrote, who plays guitar in the band. He's playing lead guitar. And, it's a whole other sound that's coming out, and we're all down the line a bit now. We're all a bit older quite a bit older. And we're all just down the line, and it's sort of evolving again, and it actually is very exciting, I have to say. It's still not boring. I mean, I still enjoy it. So as long as it's not boring, and I think we had a good break there. I took time off. I've been doing acting and all that kind of stuff, and I make films and all that. So it's been a bit of a break from that, but it's really refreshing just to get back in the room with the boys. It's really like family,
Yeah, well, and in just doing a little bit of research on you guys and everything, I mean, speaking about just sort of, I guess, the eclecticness of things, or like the kind of, I don't know, disparate places that creation comes from, I guess even at the beginning of In the Meantime, as mainstream a hit as that is, there's a sample from Penguin Cafe Orchestra in there, and there's some other things going on that are sort of, I guess maybe a tip of the cap to your classical training, where, maybe your average radio listener doesn't think about it that way. But, but even then, even in that example of what might, sort of did become a mainstream hit, there still is kind of this little hint of artistry in there.
Well, yeah, I think In the Meantime also, I mean, obviously we're talking about that song, I was listening, because I don't sit down and listen to the music all the time, obviously. Many years went by, I'm not listening to it. And then Johnny, the drummer, sent me a playlist of what he thought we should probably rehearse when we came here. And there was just like many more songs than we were going to actually rehearse, but just to kind of get our ears back in it. And I just sat down and listened to it, and I was like, it's not bad, it's really like varied. There's a lot of different moods. Roy's voice obviously connects it all. But if you listen to In the Meantime, you listen to the bass line in the Meantime, it's a very melodic bass line. I mean, he's going up and down the neck. Dum 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 dum. It's quite sort of melodic, and then all these ramps which are quite melodramatic, and and then, as you say, the Penguin Cafe Street Orchestra that my brother sampled, which was taken from a piece called Telephone and Rubber Band. It's pretty out there. And then that hook that Richard's playing, the bow wow wow wow. It's quite a melodic thing, and even the sort of woo, that bit, it's like, it is quite unusual. It's not very samey. It's not really like anything else, to be honest, that song.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in there. And actually, I mean, if you compare it to sort of your contemporaries of that era, the Pearl Jams and stuff like that, I mean,
yeah.
Obviously they've done really well for themselves. They seem to be hanging in there.
Yeah,
but their sound was, at least in those those days, was simpler. Right,
That's
it was a couple really driving guitars. You got a bass line in the back and some drums. They didn't sample a lot. They didn't bring in a lot of these other sounds and different movements. But to your point, I mean, In the Meantime feels almost orchestral itself. Like there's all these different movements happening at a time, and there's these big sounds and stuff like that. And obviously we're being very, very analytical here, but in the grander spectrum, I guess, like especially with that album, if you listen to the rest of that album, you really get a feel for the breadth of I don't know, like training or expertise that you guys are bringing to the album, versus just kind of being another rock song. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, look, first of all, I love Pearl Jam. We toured with them actually a little bit, and I mean, obviously, it would be anybody, loves Nirvana and then Soundgarden, all brilliant bands, like brilliant, just different influences. They come from another part of the world. Ironically, we broke out of within the meantime out of Seattle, where we're going actually soon, and it's interesting because that's where a lot of those bands came from, and, it's interesting their sound because, of course, we come from the north of England, from Leeds, and it's a very different influence. So, that growing up there, what music was doing when I was a young lad and the influences that we had on us, quite different, I'm sure, than the lads that were coming from like Seattle, for example, or the United States. So yeah, the influences were different, and as a result, the sound is different, And I was not sure if we would ever find a footing, to be honest. A bit like when we toured with Oasis. While obviously everybody knows Wonderwall, but a lot of the way our Oasis's attitude was when we toured with them and the Black Crowes. A lot of Americans didn't understand it, that whole English swagger bit. They thought it was kind of insulting, to the audience. I think they didn't understand it. Whereas in England, they love all that because it's sort of like the grandiosity and all that of Liam, Oh, he was a brilliant singer, by the way, but you know what he's like. I mean, he's a funny dude, and he's larging it up and generally being, what's the word, disparaging really to the audience, which I think it must be like some weird masochism the English have, they seem to like being abused by the pop star, the rock stars, but I feel blessed, man, that I got to experience what I did and in this country, and I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have been able to do it anywhere. I wouldn't have been able to get it going in England anyway, that's for sure.
Yeah, so, no, it's funny. Whenever I think about those kinds of things, I have this stupid phrase that I say all the time, but it's just to stave off regret or thinking that I did something wrong. And I just say it's taken every step it ever took for me to get to where I am today, right?
That's
so
it.
There's no wrong steps. Everything's great. And so for, a band like you guys that has a big hit like that, I mean, obviously it came when it came, and maybe you could have slow rolled it, but maybe it would have come at the wrong time and it wouldn't have hit at all. Or, but I think that one thing that I really like about you guys, as opposed to some of your contemporaries who I think were a little more commercially driven, or they were more, they found a sound that worked and then they just stick with that sound. I think you guys sort of bring your artistry to the table, and I mean, we can go ahead and proceed and maybe into the next record, and how that was sort of an extension of your sort of creativity, in that you guys were making music for you weren't making music necessarily for commercial success. Not to say that wouldn't be lovely also, but but it was. I think there's something about the authenticity, or sort of the realness, so to speak, of artists making art for art's sake. And then if it happens to be commercially viable, that's great. But I mean, I'm sure, and you can maybe talk to this a little bit, I'm sure there were some external pressures around that sophomore release, but nonetheless, I think you guys managed to stay true to you.
I think we did, and I do. You're right, though. There were a lot of pressures, and I think obviously a label smells, money, and they want to maximize it. That's their in business to do that, and certainly we felt that pressure. And I think, when you have it, when it's such a big hit, you kind of are almost like really open. You can get that again. You kind of. I don't know, especially when you're that young. I mean, my brother, when we got started, as I said, was like 21, by the time it all hit, he was only 22, 23 by the time we were getting ready to go and do a second record, and by that time we toured like, as my brother would say, the world and elsewhere, but we'd been all over the place, bombing around and all over TV and all this stuff. So our lives had changed significantly by then, and I think we were a little bit graspy. I do think the record stands up. I think it's a well-recorded record, and I think that's credit to Bryce Goggin, who actually is coming to Salt Lake, actually.
Oh, great.
The producer is coming with his wife. We've not played in so many years. They wanted to come, so they're going to be at a few shows, but I think Salt Lake is the first show. But yeah, it's he really was instrumental in, keeping our feet on the ground a bit and helping us not get too up our own, jacksy, because I think that, you can get egoic and all that stuff, especially as a young man when you get blown up like that, But no, I think we've managed to, we stayed true to it, and I think the sound stands up, and it still does, I think, the Chinese album, I mean, whether we didn't really have a hit as such. I mean, Mungo City came out, and it did okay for us. It wasn't like as big as In the Meantime.
Sure, but it charted. And,
it charted, yeah, and we played it on, Letterman and all those things as well.
Sure.
And then, but it wasn't as big as In the Meantime. But no, I think you're right. I think we did stay true to ourselves, man. And I think that, as I say, is credit to those that helped us make the records,
Well, so let's just talk about sort of, I guess, the business of the band and sort of, creativity in general. As you guys continue to move through your trajectory, I mean, obviously you had the 2001 record, the Hoggassy, and then again, after a little bit of a hiatus, you dropped As It Is on Earth. So Spacehog's still making music throughout this era.
Yeah.
And we can talk a little bit about coming and going and all that as you like. But one of the things, I mean, I think it, and, not to just kind of like, I don't know, blow too much smoke up your ass about sort of your creativity and all that stuff, but like you guys went on to do a lot of other things too that are very artistic and creative. It's interesting about you in particular. You started out in film, as you were describing at the top of this, and or I guess in advertising or marketing or wherever, you want to, however you want to position that. But you went on to do a lot of acting and work in film and things like that. And it's funny to me how like the creative mind just does these things, right? Like, so that's the way that you express yourself, is whether it's through music or it's through these other means that, this is how you're finding your way around. Were other members of the band sort of as creative, or is there sort of a creative force within the band that, really drove everything, or is it just like a group of 4 creative guys and you all did this kind of stuff?
Well, I think we all had that impulse, I think my brother and Richard particularly are what you might call, live and die musicians, whereas I went a bit more polymath in the sense that I always had many interests, and I'm probably the worst musician in the band, to be honest with you. The least accomplished. I probably am, I've got guitar picks that says the worst guitarist ever. But I have to learn everything by rote, my instincts are not really as strong as my brothers. However, they've been blowing me up a little bit recently because there was a period where I didn't play in the band, and I have to say, when I listened to the music that they were doing, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm doing something. I just don't know what it is, because I'm not a brilliant guitar player. But I think, they all have got that impulse to creativity. I mean, Johnny's always been in bands his whole life, and except recently, 10 years ago, he went back to school and became a shrink, and so now he's a therapist. And the funny thing is, he's working with MAPS, which is like music, what's it called? I don't know what it is, but it's like a music thing, and and I think is it MAPS? I don't know. They use psychedelics in like addiction therapy and all that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he's working with them as a therapist, and he's bringing what he's got in terms of his musical background to help other artists, navigating the way through the music biz, which I think is brilliant, actually. It's going to be great because he's got all that experience, and now he's a shrink as well, so he can really help him, But I went on to I started out when I first got done with touring, and we broke up initially in 2001 after September 11th happened. I moved to Spain, and it was all a bit of a weird time, to be honest. We got back together again in 2004, and then we had breaks again. But when I was done with that, I met the woman who would become my wife, and Victoria, and she was making a film at the time, and I started helping her edit it a bit. So initially I got into editing, not acting. And I've been editing probably for 10 or 15 years, in and out of doing other things. But I know, of course, I never really pursued being an actor. It just came my way. I did this movie, Velvet Goldmine, many years ago when I was still in the band, which is kind of a movie about David Bowie. And I just played in one of the bands. And then I went on to do a bunch of movies. I did one called I'm Still Here, which Joaquin Phoenix was in. It was like his spoof documentary. Then I went on to recently I've done a film called The Trouble with Nature, which I play a British philosopher in a pair of tights and a wig, and climb a mountain, with a white face, powder. Anyway, I've really enjoyed that because I was playing the lead in that one, and I really enjoyed it. We shot that in the Alps, and then I'm finishing a movie. I've got one more scene to do right now, which is called John, which is about Sir John Franklin, another British explorer actually, and admiral of the British Navy, and he found the Northwest Passage, which goes across the top of Canada, which the British were trying to get across around America in a way, and try and figure out a way to get to Southeast Asia for tea and all that stuff. Desperate for more tea and spices, because the food was so bland, that they had to. But yeah, so I think we're all pretty creative, and we've all continued. And I think Johnny, for example, who's now a therapist, so he's a professional as well. He also, I think, finds a lot of his work quite creative, especially putting treatment plans together for people that are in the biz,
Sure.
And, also you have to make a dime, we always have to continue, one way or another. So I've really turned my hand to many different things. I've chefed, I've done all kinds of stuff, and I really like, keeping it varied in my case,
Yeah.
No,
I can totally relate to you because I'm a little bit more that way too, like kind of jack of all trades, you know, and jump around and do a lot of things. But it's not, for me anyway, it's not about necessarily making a career out of anything, but it's just I have this curiosity to chase down. Yeah. And that sounds like you also.
Yeah.
Can we talk about just sort of the business of the band then? So as you mentioned, there's ups and downs, there's breakups, there's makeups, there's all this stuff going on over a long time. I mean, it's 30 years of a human's life, right? I mean, this is, it's a lot of ground to cover. Everybody says life is short, but when you're in it, it's a lot. And but obviously, you guys have shared IP, shared ownership, brands, songs, licensing deals to strike, these kinds of things. What does the business of Spacehog look like in terms of managing the brand and trying to keep, I guess generating income, or, I mean, in the case of In the Meantime, I mean, it certainly still appears and, all over the place. And I think most recently in a Guardians of the Galaxy trailer and some things like that. So, I mean, the song is still living a life, even if you guys are doing other things. And so how do you manage that as a group of people who, have come and gone and have had, love and hate for one another and all these things over the years?
Yeah, we definitely had those things. And I think, we've been quite lucky in the sense that, we had great management in the beginning with David Sonnenberg looked after us in New York, and great agents we've had over the years, and then business managers and so on that have sort of set us up a little bit. But then in other ways, again, like when we have the benefit of hindsight, in the 2020, isn't it? And you might have set things up differently, how investment, bands, when you've got money coming in, it feels like it's going to keep coming in forever at that volume, And I remember when we released Resident Alien in the beginning, we sold in the first week, I think we sold 500 copies. And I told my brother, well, I don't know 500 people. Who the hell's buying it, I didn't understand marketing and business yet, And then the next week we sold 1,000, and it kept growing until we were selling 40,000 a week, And it was like, so then you start to see money coming in. It feels like it's going to be like that forever. So I think the only mistakes that we might have made in business was just investment in ourselves. But like you say, the IP stands, and that, there've been different iterations where different publishing companies have owned parts of that, and we've done deals with them to share in the publishing and taken in advance to kind of liquidate get us some cash flow with the band at different times when we've needed it. But now we own the publishing, and we're about actually to renew or actually redo our publishing contract. That's coming up, I think that's coming up in August, if I'm not mistaken. And it's an opportunity to restack the deck, so that's what we're hoping to do. And just, when you've got a song that's like the jewel in the crown, like In the Meantime, it's hard to get the other stuff to really work. And that's something we've got a lot of material at this point. There's 5 albums if you include a live record that we did. And we're working on new music now. So it's really about, and the world is a different place now. Albums used to account for a lot of your income, and now it's a lot of the world is singles driven because it's obviously all streamers, And my brother worked actually as A&R in between when we sort of done touring. He got a job working for Spotify, and he was head of A&R up there for a bit. And he was just, artist relations really. And so he understood, he learned a lot about how that operates, that world operates, and the streams and so on. So we're developing that, and as we sort of try to re-enter the market and reposition ourselves, it's an interesting time as well for bands that are a bit older, and particularly from the 90s. There seems to be a new sort of there's a new sort of resurgence of that sort of music going around. And especially at our age, our manager manages the Psychedelic Furs, amongst other bands as well. And, they're on tour right now playing the Greek with Gary Newman. And these old dudes that have been around, I mean, they're a lot older than, I think Butler's like, the singer in the Furs is like, I think he's 70, if not older now, and still at it, So I think that stigma, I can remember seeing Rolling Stones many years ago and thinking, well, I'm never going to do that. When I get that old, I'm going to hang up my Spurs, But the truth of the matter is, it feels good to be doing it, And frankly, I think now we're in some ways we're better than we were because we're less in our own egos and much more grounded in that sense, So, and I think that business-wise, we're going to have to restack the deck a bit, and we're just getting started. This is our first tour in many years, and we're going to record sometime this year. and I think new music, then feather that out to the streamers, so doing like one a month, a song a month to bring that awareness back and rebuild it. And of course, when we sort of wrapped it last time, the internet wasn't as potent as it is now, and doing podcasts, for example, was not really the thing to do then. It was, you had to get on TV or radio, so it's a different world, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the music like now. And also, you've got a more direct relationship with your audience, and I think you can have a much more sort of direct and, as it were, intimate relationship with your audience, and I think marketing wise, you can go direct to them, and if they feel included, I think that seems to be win-win. So we've got to get our heads around producing a bit more content. Obviously, I worked in that game as well, so hopefully we're going to get shooting more stuff. In the meantime, to coin the phrase, great name for a song. Great name for a song.
Copyright.
Exactly. I'm just going to keep saying that and hope I get some extra royalties.
Yeah, I was going to say somebody ought to be cutting you a check.
Yeah, and anyway, if any of your listeners are listening, go and listen to In the Meantime, because every time you spin it, I get another 0.0001 cent.
Hey, those millions of a cent round up.
They all add up.
You just got to give them time. Yeah, no, I think it's great, and I love your perspective on this stuff too, because obviously, I mean, the music industry itself, I mean, is like totally reversed of what it was in the olden days.
Yeah.
It used to be much harder to get music out. I mean, I guess it's a testament to your older music and the work that you guys were doing in the early 90s. I mean, just what it took to go big then versus what it takes to go big now. And not to say that there aren't musicians that work really hard today to get a hit. But I mean, you get the right cat video associated with something on TikTok and you've got it, Yeah. So, I mean, so there's a lot of avenues that maybe didn't exist to you guys before.
Yeah.
So maybe in the spirit of that, and you maybe alluded to some of it here, but as you're talking about moving forward, into the future, and obviously things have changed, you guys are, older, wiser, you've got a different approach or different attitude to music now than you used to. And I think one thing that really serves bands of sort of your era, or, that began life in your era, is the fact that your fans are older too. And they have jobs now, and they've built careers, and they can spend money on the things they love, and they can come to shows, and they can do all these things, I mean, I think this year, God, we're seeing 3 or 4 kind of bands that, I've known over the years, like we'll see 311 this summer and some of these others that, I mean, I've been listening to since I was a kid, but now I'm old enough to get the nice seat up front. And, hopefully I won't have to stand the whole show. And, some of these other things, and so it's
hopefully
funny.
I won't have to stand the whole show too. I'm going to sit down, I think.
Exactly. Get yourself a nice stool.
Exactly.
But I think that there's some benefit for people or for bands of your era that they can really capitalize on this, audience that now isn't broke. Because there used to be, an audience of broke kids that were really watching you and following the band around and doing what they could. But in a world now where you don't make your money necessarily off the music always, sometimes you do through licensing or things like that. But I mean, to your point, your millionth of a cent royalty, that's not really how a lot of bands are making money these days. Now they're making their money off of merchandise or, live performance if they can actually own most of that. And, if they don't require too much support. And that might be a benefit too of being a little older, a little more established, having done a little bit more. Maybe you require a little less support than you once did. Or you already have the infrastructure in place to do the things so that you're not trying to go pay today's rates or find somebody to do it that's an unknown.
Well, that's right. I think like you were saying, I mean, like time and life, roll the edges off, don't they? They just, you get bloodied a little bit and you get kicked around a bit and you sort of like, you gain a little humility that I think was when you're a bit younger, you tend to be a bit more arrogant. And like I said, you think it's going to be rolling in forever. And I think that we probably, if we get another bite at the apple, whether that's on a small scale, I mean, which is what pleased me no end, is to just have a really good relationship with our audience and develop that again as we start again in the touring and in the merch, as you say, and having a direct relationship through social media with our audience, and maybe not having as big of an audience and doing as bigger gigs, but having more direct relationship and developing that, And I think right now for example, we're going to get started. I mean, we don't know we're probably not going to sell out everything. A couple of markets better than others, but it'll probably be thin on the ground in some places because we've been gone for so long. So it's going to take a minute to bring it back round. But this is the beginning, and I think. We're definitely less high maintenance than we used to be, and we drive ourselves at times. We do have a tour manager this time, but we've gone really low on. We used to have like 5 people with us at all times, always in a bus, flying around everywhere, hotel rooms, lodging it up, But we were generating a lot of money then in those days, both from publishing royalties and from everything. I mean, tour support. We were doing 10 or 15 grand a night in T-shirts, you know, and that's just in the supporting slot, you know. And then later on, when we were headlining, we were doing even more. So you know, merch is going to be a big piece for us, developing that, and I think, yeah, like you say, licensing is always great, but again, most of the value of that is in the fact that songs are well known, you know, so you can associate that. I do want to develop what other music we've got that's not been seen as much. I mean, some of it's, you know, got sync fees and stuff like that, but it'd be good to develop that because there's a whole catalogue there at this point in our career, you know, that we can develop. And yeah, I think it's just such a different world and ways that bands find income streams, you know. I mean, I know that my brother was talking about, I know the Furs do this, which is where, to your point about sitting on the front row and getting a seat now, I know they do these special packages where you pay extra money and you go hang out with the band, or, you know, they do things like that. So I definitely like to offer that as we get down the line a bit, when, you know, assuming that people want to do that. But we're still a bit early days. But
well, and I'll tell you, just as somebody who's a big music fan, I mean, I tour managed bands for a while and stuff like that. So I mean, I've been to literally thousands and thousands of concerts over my life. And I will tell you the thing that now I'm 45, and so as a 45-year-old man, the thing that I pay for at music almost more than anything else is access. And the one move that a lot of these big guys are doing now that I think is a real misstep for them is they're doing these VIP packages, kind of like what you're describing, where you pay this package and you get to, you know, show up early and you got special merch and all this stuff. But very few of them let you meet the band. And or at least in my experience, very few of them. And so in some of the bigger bands that I really like, you know, we saw the Black Keys a few years ago, and they offered something like this. And you know, I mean, it just, the thing I like as somebody with an income and with, you know, who's an adult now, it's like what I actually want to do is I want to meet the band that was important to me. You know, and it can misfire. I was a huge Primus fan for a million years, and I had the opportunity to meet Les Claypool one time, and it didn't go well. And so that kind of was a bummer for me. But I keep their posters on the wall and everything. We let it slide, but it just, you know. But so I guess it could go either way. But I think the moral of the story is that I think for older people, I mean, obviously they have some affinity for the music, things like that. I mean, it's funny. My son, my youngest son, is 14, and he's got a wall of CDs, all my old CDs that he found. And the Resident Alien album is up there on his wall right now. He's a big fan, and in fact, we're going to try and drag him out to the show on the 20th here in Salt Lake, I think.
Brilliant.
And so he's a big fan of the band and loves that song especially. And but like the thing that I always feel bad for my kids as they're coming up as music fans now is kind of the lack of the experience that you used to get when I had to show up at the music store with my $20 and there were 10 new releases this week, and which one was I going to buy? You know, and so, and I remember, I mean, I still have vivid memories of picking your album off the wall, and it's like, you know, but I mean, there's 10 albums, there's 15 albums, and I got $20. What am I going to do? And, you know, and so much of it was like opening it up the clamshell and, you know, what's in the liner notes and what's on, you know, did they hide something under the tray or whatever, you know, and it was like this whole experience of really tactile relationship with the music, you know, and I think somewhat having some scarcity was a good thing back then, which was, you know, maybe you didn't have as broad a breadth of knowledge, you know, of bands that were out there or whatever, but the bands that you did like, you were really invested in them.
Yeah, I think the market's like, I was going to say, I think the market has become much more saturated, and as a result, in some ways, you could say that music, in a certain sense, has lost some of its value in terms of that fandom stuff that when we're young and we get attached to stuff, and well, not even young. I mean, opening a record is always especially, you know, a vinyl, like a 12-inch, and you've got all the images and all that stuff. I mean, I remember doing the same thing with the bands I liked, you know, Bowie records and Iggy Pop records and all that back in the day, you know, just being blown away and just eating every little last thing that they put on the liner notes, as you say, up, you know. And I think it is, in some ways, listen, we can't stop progress, and that's where we live now, you know. Yeah. But I do think that fans are still, there is an enchantment still if you really, you know, get into a band. But I think that experience that you describe of you've got 10 records that month and you can only buy one because you've only got your $20. It's the same when kids used to come to, as you say, with the shows. You know, they buy a ticket, which might have been $10, but then, you know, it's $20 back in the 90s, you know, if as a young kid, that's what you had.
A t-shirt, it's $20.
Right. So, but now, as you say, you know, we've got an older audience. But also to the point about your kid, you know, I mean, you know, we actually have kids that come, younger people that come to shows because of the parents that have got the record. It was the parents of my generation that were listening to Spacehog back in the day, and then the kids kind of grew up with it, you know, and as a result, they now come to the gigs, and that's always a pleasure when we get new people coming and discovering it, And so that feedback loop, I think, is definitely a different world. And yeah, I don't know what it's like. I can't imagine. I know what it's like to open a record, as do you, but kids, I don't know what it's like to get everything. You got every song on Spotify or whatever.
And it's interesting. My kids are in a phase right now where they're really into some of these rap guys, as Playboy Carti and Ken Carson. Some of these guys that are making music now. My boys just love them.
Yeah,
and those guys, Tyler the Creator is another one.
Brilliant.
Just rolled out recently. A physical little set that you could buy. It came with a T-shirt, but it came with a CD. And it's hilarious because we don't have a CD player in the house. So it's like, I don't even know what we do with the CD.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they got to kind of get that experience, and I thought that was really valuable. And I think it did create an affinity for them with the musician. They'll see Ken Carson in August, and they're really excited about that. Another guy, by the way, who's selling a VIP package where you don't get to meet him. And, but I do think, just to kind of circle back to our prior point, this idea about sort of tangible relationships with the bands, I think that, and I actually write about this at some length, which is this notion about sort of technological saturation. And I think that there's this, we've never had more access to music. And so in terms of maybe having a big catalog in your brain of all the songs that you like, and we've really gone to like a single kind of world where everybody's focused on a song, not the band, not the singer, not the whatever, but it's, the one song. But I think though, when you start to turn the corner, or you get a guy and he gets into your music, I think they're more into you than ever. And and maybe I'm just projecting my own experience, but I find that the access or the ability to actually meet the artist would go so much further for me than the even going and just seeing the live performance. And in fact, I do know I'm a little bit spoiled because from all my days touring and stuff like that, like now if I have to pay for a concert ticket, I get really bummed out. I'm like, oh, I got to stand at the back of the room. I don't know anybody on stage. It's kind of a sad thing, but nonetheless, when I have the opportunity, even if it costs me a couple shekels to get up front and meet somebody, it sort of rounds out that experience for me, and even, I've got a couple things here on the back wall, different bands that have signed things and, stuff like that it's just like, those things still kind of matter to me, and maybe they don't to younger people, but I think people who will be fans of Spacehog that are the OGs, the people like me who have known the band since the early days, and then, the kids, to your point, my children have grown up on that, just like I grew up on the music of the 40s, 50s, and 60s with my folks. And so it's kind of it's fun how that kind of passes down, or you sort of inherit the genealogy of music, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting you talking about the pictures on the wall behind you. You got Lemmy over there from Motorhead, right?
Yeah.
I used to hang out with him a bit at the Rainbow Room, and actually hanging out with him because, I knew him growing up, when they did the Ace of Spades. Sure. And so for me, when I met him, as a friend of mine, and I met him at the Rainbow Room and we hung out a bunch, and I felt like that with him, But I think to your point about access to the band, I think that's much more, certainly for us, I think we would definitely offer that, going forward. And I won't even make it, financially untenable. I think initially, at least, we're developing an audience. I think having direct relationship with the audience is good. Doing an after show party, with a particular access, maybe there's a premium to pay, just to kind of make it all make sense. But I think it has to be, exclusionary. I think it would be cool to do something like that for like 10 or 15 people, that we just all hang out and just talk about what they like, because in a sense it's a good marketing strategy too. You get to talk to your audience. And I think that's much more on the cards now than it was. And I think that whole, I was thinking about this the other day, this notion of audience and performer, you're the audience, we're the performer. Some of that, the proscenium march, as they call it on the stage, where you cross over into, I keep pulling my bloody charger out. Sorry, man. But I think that world's changed. I think that engagement directly with the audience want to participate more in the realm of whatever they're into, their particular bands and favourites. I think you're right, and but the more you engage the audience, I think the more engaged they'll be, and therefore the more likely they are to to follow up and stay on it. And then because you can have this direct relationship, you can release content, once a week, twice a week, every day. You can release new music, let's say once a month, and then maybe at the end of that 12 months, you got 12 songs, put them on an album and release a vinyl, maybe do a vinyl like Tyler the Creator's done, or in his case a CD, although I'm a bit more fond of vinyl myself, but just I like the big size, but maybe that's just because I'm going blind. But
no, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, over my other shoulder, you can kind of see I've got a couple records there. I've got an old MF Doom record, and
nice.
This bottom person is a singer called Mo. She's from Denmark. She's a Danish pop singer that I just love. And
sweet.
But her new album just came out, and she always puts out a record.
What's her name? Mo.
Yeah, it's like M-O with a line through it. I think it's like M. Is how you say it. But yeah, something like that. So anyway, yeah, I've been following her around for a decade, and I still can't say it quite right. But we just saw her in LA a couple weeks ago, and for her album release parties, and so she dropped the new vinyl, and so of course I picked it up. So I love the vinyl. Of course, I never stopped collecting vinyl, but I think what it does too is like I say, I don't have a CD player in the house anymore, and I love digital music and having Spotify as much as anybody does, in terms of being able to get access to everything and be exposed to a lot of new things, and try not to become the old, get off my yard guy who doesn't listen to anything made in the last 30 years. Exactly. But nonetheless, it is nice to be able to access some of that old stuff too. And so I love the digital music, but I do love the tangible activity of being able to, I got that record in the mail and I got to open it up and look at the artwork and all these things. And, there's still something I really like about that. So to the idea too about maybe doing something that's like a VIP thing. There's this business writer, a guy named Kevin Kelly, that has this notion of what he calls the 1,000 true fans, which is that basically you just need 1,000 true fans to be able to really do anything. And I have to suspect for bands of your ilk and bands of your era who have adult fans now who've been following you around for a long time. I don't think it would be that tough to pull together that 1,000 true fans, and if you treat them right, to your point, being able to, whether it's spend time with them, organize Q&A sessions, do these different things, I think you could probably maximize and have something like that maybe younger bands don't even have the privilege of doing. They're going to the people who really, I guess, commoditize their music because you're just one of 50 singles I'm going to get served today. And so a lot of music is really commoditized like that, where you guys probably have a little bit more affinity that you can play off of. So it'll be exciting to see what's going on.
Well, and also we have the back end with like Spotify. Like I told you, my brother worked for Spotify, and because you've got Spotify, I have another app called Spotify Artists, and you get access. And because my brother worked there, he's got access to all the sort of back end data of how many people are listening, which ones have got it in their playlist, and how often they spin it. And so there's a lot of data available, and I think that engagement clearly is absolutely vital now. And I think in part we are actually catching up a little bit with that, because although partly none of us have put our shoulder to the plow on that. We're just getting going. And certainly I'm going to produce more content. And I do agree with you 100%. I think, or with Kevin Kelly as well, that 1,000 true fans, the true believers, is worth its weight in gold. I mean, because everyone is then, first of all, they show up at everything. Second of all, they pretty much, want to listen to stuff or buy stuff. And also they spread the word, so certainly that's something we need to develop. Yeah. And it will really help our marketing strategy across the board.
Yeah. And like these people over my shoulder here, they're called The Warning. They're this trio of sisters from Monterrey, Mexico that are touring around right now. I was talking to their manager in Amsterdam last summer, and he was saying that they're basically doing all their touring based on Spotify plays.
Wow.
So
that makes sense.
They're looking at the data in there, and it's kind of a gift and a curse, right? I was like, oh, well, you guys have to come to Salt Lake. I'd love to see you guys. We have a really huge, Hispanic population here and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, well, you guys are from Mexico. We have a lot of Hispanic folks from South America here. Like, you guys you'd have to do great, And he's like, well, man, we were looking at the numbers and we just don't do good in Salt Lake. He's like, I don't know why, but he's like, we just don't have a lot of listeners in Salt Lake City. And so it kind of bums me out, because in the olden days, the part of the mission, and you can probably speak to this, but I mean, you guys had to tour every city just to get the word out. Like, there's no other way. Like, you didn't have the internet to tweet your stuff out,
That's right.
But instead, you had to go and travel to all these cities. And so I think there's going to be a lot of markets that get overlooked by musicians nowadays because they're chasing the data. But at the same time, if you have limited dollars and limited time and limited everything else, how could you argue with that idea?
Well, in terms of pre-sales, that's putting it out there with regards to Salt Lake City, and I'm hoping that your podcast will get the word out there a little bit for us and maybe help us with that a bit. We've not done a lot of pre-sales in Salt Lake City, and I think that Salt Lake, it's not notoriously a big music town as far as I know, although I'm not an expert. We've played there a few times before, but and like you say, I think one of the things it is though, Salt Lake's sort of strategically placed right in between. Like we're coming from Seattle, it's a long drive to Salt Lake, but that's where we'll be coming from. And then from there, you got, it's a stopover on the way to Denver, and then doing Phoenix and all the rest. So, I think I still think it's valuable to actually show up in a town, and I think but there are economics involved, obviously,
Sure.
and you got to drive everywhere and so on. So, if you're an artist from, let's say, from Europe, and you want to make an impression, maybe you want to hit the big markets. And if you've got the data and you're suddenly like popping off in I don't know, in Indiana for some reason, then we used to get caught in something we called the Ohio vortex. We couldn't keep. We thought our agent had it in for us. We just kept going around and around Ohio, but we did really well there. Cleveland and all that. So I think that data, like you say, is a blessing and a curse. I think you've got to kind of pick your battles though, and sometimes economically it makes more sense to follow the numbers. But I think it also then, as you say, deprives, potential listeners and also potential people that might be one of those 1,000 people of true believers,
Yeah.
So who knows if we get one in Salt Lake.
Well, you've got one at least, so I'll give you that.
Good man.
So we're getting kind of here to the end. I want to just kind of talk to you quickly about the tour, how this came together, what it took to sort of, I guess, put this thing back in motion, because, not unlike you guys, EMF have not been on the road, in a while. And this is their first time back to the States in a long time. And so I wonder if you just talk briefly about how that tour came together, and we can talk a little bit about the dates.
Well, I think what came up was, we had a big hit, they had a big hit. We thought we could help each other out a bit. I think, in a way, in some ways, we were lucky enough that we had a lot of exposure in the United States, and especially on MTV and on the TV shows that we did. And back in those days, a lot of radio exposure. So I think more perhaps than I think EMF suffered from that problem where, the song was so massive there, unbelievable, such a big hit, but people don't necessarily know it's EMF, and they don't necessarily put the faces with the name, with the song, and that's a big connect, and I think we've been lucky in that happened a bit more for us, and not for everybody, but certainly we managed to do that a bit more, just in part because we did do all that touring, However, it sort of came together. It really was our agent. My brother had been managed by, his name's Rob Dillman, and he'd been managing the Furs and a few other bands, and he was working with my brother, helping my brother tour when he was a solo artist. And then about a year ago, a concert came up that was a big festival, which actually ended up not happening, but it was they were offering quite a bit of money to play it. And we were like, well, we'd just done Guardians of the Galaxy, had just come out, and it looked like there was some heat again around the band and that song. And so we thought, let's get together. So we got together. It felt really good. There was no arguing anymore and no ego shit. So it just suddenly felt good, and it just came across our agent's desk that, EMF were going to go out, and it seemed to be a fit, they're not really like us musically per se, but, they're in our age group and they've got that big song that they had. So it made sense that we'd kind of co-headline with them and just go out together and see what happens, And I think, like I say, some markets are going to be a bit thin on the ground and others are doing quite well, So it's a bit of a kind of let's test it out and see where we end up, and finding the right partner for the next tour is going to be also a step, or maybe we can get on some festival dates, maybe either later in the summer or next year, So it's going to be a feel it out right now, just to see what's there for us. And I think that's both for our management and for our agent. But, it just seemed to fit on this particular one, and just want to test it out, It's kind of it's the break-even tour, Unless we sell a load of merch, in which case, I might be able to buy myself a new pair of trousers when I get back.
Well, that sounds awesome. Well, and just to kind of go through the dates real quick, we've got 11 cities with EMF. We've got San Jose, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Salt Lake, Denver, Phoenix, San Diego, Santa Ana, Los Angeles, of course, and Las Vegas. I think it's going to be a really exciting time, and I, for one, I'll be out on the evening of the 20th to catch that show, so that'll be a lot of fun, and hopefully we can catch up over there. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, Anthony. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure and a privilege, and I hope we'll see all the Salt Lake people down there, and we look forward to putting on a good show for you guys.
Absolutely, and thanks so much to everybody who tunes in the show this week and every week, and we'll see you guys next time.
Cheers.